Ever wondered how the world's first cities kept track of everyone? Let's travel back in time, about 5,000 years, to ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. This is where cities like Uruk and Ur thrived, bustling with people, trade, and incredible innovation. They gave us writing, the wheel, and some of the earliest forms of government. But their methods for managing people, well, that's where things get a little strange, and frankly, a bit chilling. Archaeologists have unearthed tens of thousands of clay tablets from this region. These tablets were the ancient equivalent of spreadsheets, databases, and government records all rolled into one. Scribes would use a reed stylus to press wedge-shaped marks, Cuneiform script, into wet clay, creating permanent records of everything imaginable. They tracked grain harvests, temple offerings, and trade deals. And they also tracked people. But here's the shocking part. When you look closely at these ancient records, you find something startling. The symbols used to count laborers, prisoners of war, and even certain temple workers were often the exact same symbols used to count livestock. That's right. A person could be listed on a clay tablet right next to a sheep or a cow, using the same bureaucratic shorthand. Imagine a list: 5 sheep, 10 goats, 3 laborers. To the administrators of ancient Sumer, it was all just a matter of accounting for state-owned assets. This wasn't necessarily born out of pure malice, but from a brutally pragmatic system. These early city-states were highly organized, almost like massive corporations. The rulers, the priests, and the administrative class needed to know exactly what resources they had at their disposal. And to them, human labor was a resource, just like an ox that pulls a plow or a sheep that provides wool. So, who were these people being counted like cattle? They were often prisoners captured in the frequent wars between city-states. They were also people who had fallen into debt and were forced into servitude, or they were simply the lowest class of laborers who worked on the massive public projects of the time. Think of the great ziggurats, the towering temple pyramids that dominated the Mesopotamian skyline. Building something like that required a colossal workforce. The state needed to feed, house, and manage these thousands of workers. And the most efficient way to do that, in their minds, was to reduce individuals to numbers on a ledger. These tablets give us an unfiltered look into their social structure. It was incredibly rigid and hierarchical. At the very top, you had the king and the high priests, seen as intermediaries to the gods. Below them were the scribes, merchants, and skilled artisans. And at the very bottom were the laborers and slaves, the human cogs in this vast societal machine. Their individual identities, their hopes, their families, none of that mattered for the state's accounting. What mattered was their capacity for work. The records would note if they were male or female, adult or child, simply to calculate their labor value and the rations they were owed. A male worker might receive a larger barley ration than a female worker, and a child would receive even less. It was a cold, hard calculation of inputs and outputs. This system wasn't just for massive construction projects. It extended to the agricultural sector as well. The temples and palaces owned vast tracts of land, essentially functioning as massive statron farms. The people who worked these fields were often listed in the same inventories as the animals they tended. The list might detail the number of seed plows available, the number of oxen to pull them, and the number of plowmen required to operate them. In this context, the human was just another component of an agricultural unit. Their value was directly tied to their function within the system of food production. This perspective is so alien to our modern way of thinking about individual rights and human dignity. But for the rulers of Mesopotamia, it was essential for control. By meticulously tracking their population and resources, they could plan for the future. They could forecast grain yields, allocate labor for building canals and walls, and ensure the state's granaries were full. This bureaucratic control was the backbone of their civilization. It allowed them to support large, dense populations and create a level of social complexity never before seen in human history. Without this rigorous, and to our eyes, dehumanizing accounting, these first cities might have collapsed under their own weight. It also highlights the power of writing. The invention of cuneiform wasn't just for writing epic poetry like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Its primary purpose was administration. Writing was a tool of power. It allowed the elite to see, count, and control their subjects from a distance. A scribe in a palace office could manage an entire estate of hundreds of people and animals without ever having to set foot on it, simply by reading and creating these clay tablets. The lists transformed messy, complex reality into neat, orderly rows of symbols. It made the world manageable for the ruling class. So while we look back and are shocked by the idea of people being counted like animals, we also have to recognize the legacy of this system. This Mesopotamian obsession with lists, with accounting, with bureaucracy, laid the groundwork for all future states and empires. Every government today that keeps census records, tax rolls, and statistical data is a distant descendant of these ancient Sumerian scribes. Of course, our modern systems are, thankfully, built on a foundation of human rights and dignity. We are counted as individual citizens, not as assets. But studying these ancient tablets serves as a powerful and humbling reminder. It shows us that concepts we take for granted, like the inherent value of an individual, are not universal truths. They are ideas that were fought for and developed over thousands of years. In the dawn of civilization, in the bustling cities of Mesopotamia, the line between a person and a possession could be as thin as a single mark on a piece of clay. It's a stark illustration of how far we've come, and a lesson from the past that we should never forget. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey back in time, be sure to subscribe for more stories from our ancient world. Ever wondered how the world's first cities kept track of everyone? You might think of a simple census, a head count, for taxes, right? Well, in ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the reality was a lot more brutal. Imagine being counted not as a person, but as a piece of property, no different from a sheep or a cow. Today, we're digging up the chilling truth hidden in 5,000-year-old clay tablets. This isn't just about numbers. It's about a mindset that saw human beings as mere assets. A system where your life was recorded in the same column as livestock. Let's travel back in time, to the bustling city-states of Sumer, like Uruk and Ur. These weren't just small towns. They were massive urban centers, with tens of thousands of people, complex economies, and monumental architecture like Zig. To manage all this, the Sumerians invented one of the most powerful tools in human history, writing. But its first use wasn't for poetry or epic tallies. It was for accounting. They needed to track everything. Every sack of barley, every jug of beer, every sheep, and, chillingly, every single person under their control. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of these administrative records, inscribed in cuneiform on small clay tablets. And when they deciphered them, they found something astonishing. The symbols and formatting used to list state-owned laborers, prisoners of war, and even certain types of temple servants were identical to those used for cataloging the state's herds of cattle and flocks of sheep. Think about that for a second. On one line, a scribe would note 5 sheep. On the next, using the exact same structure, they might write 3 female weavers. There was no distinction. A person, in the eyes of this bureaucracy, was just another unit of labor, another mouth to feed, another asset to be managed by the state. So, who were these people? They were the engine of the Mesopotamian economy. They were the laborers who dug the irrigation canals that made the land fertile, the workers who built the towering city walls and temples, the weavers who produced textiles for trade, and the farmers who toiled in the fields. Many were prisoners of war, captured in the constant conflicts between cities. Others might have been born into a state of servitude, or fallen into debt, and forced to work it off. Their lives were completely controlled by the central authority, whether it was the temple or the palace. These tablets give us a stark glimpse into their daily existence. They weren't just lists of names. They recorded work assignments, ration allocations, and even deaths. A record might detail that a group of 10 workers was assigned to the barley harvest for a month. Another tablet would specify their daily rations, a certain amount of grain, oil, and beer. It was a highly organized, almost factory-like system. The state provided for their basic survival, but only in exchange for their total labor. The goal wasn't their well-being. It was maximizing their productivity for the benefit of the elite. Being listed alongside livestock meant you were viewed as a resource to be exploited, not as an individual with rights or freedom. This system highlights the incredibly rigid social hierarchy of ancient Mesopotamia. At the very top were the king, priests, and nobles, who lived lives of luxury. Below them were merchants, artisans, and free citizens. And at the very bottom was this vast, nameless workforce, the human cattle of the state. There was very little social mobility. If you were born into this class of laborers, your destiny was largely sealed. You would work where you were told, eat what you were given, and your children would likely inherit the same fate. Your value was purely economic. Why was this system so crucial for them? Mesopotamia was a land of immense agricultural wealth, but it required massive, coordinated effort to maintain. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided water, but they were unpredictable, prone to flooding and drought. A powerful central government was needed to organize the labor to build and maintain the complex network of canals and dikes that made farming possible on a grand scale. This control over labor and food was the foundation of their power. By meticulously tracking every person and every grain of wheat, the rulers of Mesopotamia could plan massive public works projects, feed their armies, and accumulate vast surpluses of wealth. They could build ziggurats that touched the sky because they had a system that treated thousands of people like building blocks. It's a sobering thought. We often romanticize the ancient world, thinking of great kings and epic myths. But for the majority of people, life was a story of relentless toil, with their humanity reduced to a tally mark on a clay tablet. These ancient records force us to confront a darker side of the birth of civilization. The same administrative genius that gave us cities and writing also created a system of impersonal, bureaucratic control that stripped people of their individuality. They weren't citizens in the modern sense. They were cogs in a great machine. This isn't to say they were emotionless robots. We have other texts, like legal codes and letters, that show a more complex picture of Mesopotamian society. But the administrative tablets are undeniable evidence of a prevailing state ideology. In the cold, hard logic of Sumerian accounting, a human laborer was an entry in a ledger, a resource to be managed just like any other. This discovery fundamentally changed our understanding of early civilization. It shows that the path to complexity and order wasn't always a noble one. It was often built on the backs of people who were counted, catalogued, and controlled, just like cattle in a field. So the next time you see an image of a majestic ziggurat, remember the story hidden in the clay. Remember the thousands of unnamed people, their lives recorded not in epic poems, but in the dry, dispassionate language of accounting, listed side by side with the animals. It's a powerful reminder that progress and oppression can often go hand in hand. Thank you for watching. If you found this dive into the past fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge what you think you know about history. See you next time.